everybody. Welcome back to the Academy of Divine Knowledge. Today we have Foster Gamble himself, the man behind Thrive Part 1 and Part 2. Part 2 just came out in September of 2020. And it's an honor to have you on, Foster. Thank you so much for being with us.
You are welcome. I'm thrilled to get to be a part of your community here.
Absolutely. You know, I just watched your Thrive film, the first one from 2012, for the third time. Actually, I watched it to refresh my memory between yesterday and today. And it's so incredible to see how even pretty much 9-10 years ago, you were so on the money, no pun intended, because it's really all about follow the money, right? But you were so on the money of what's happening, what's the bigger picture here, and how do we get to that point in a rational way, instead of going the whole, oh, well, this is just like, we're just going to throw it out there, right? You come with evidence, you come with proof, so-called, even though that's not enough for many people, because you could bring black and white evidence to people and they'll say no. But in my perspective and many people's perspectives, you've come with evidence, tangible evidence to show this is what's happening and this is how I got there. So big picture, you know, Thrive was all about what's going on. What are your projections already 9 years ago of how this totalitarian tiptoe, as David Icke would call it, is coming to fruition, and how we can follow that through following the money. My question for you is, and many people's question for you, by the way, is if we were to redo the steps that you took 9 years ago today, where should we look and what can we look at to see where the current situation is moving in the next 10 years?
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. You know, we had one frame in Thrive 2 in the final chapter, Thrive 1, where I say in the voiceover, I say, this is what the depopulation agenda looks like today. And we put on one screen, you know, not only the GMO and chemtrails and pesticides and so forth, but we said at the time that there would be the toxic radiation, there would be toxic vaccines, and a man-made pandemic, you know, mandatory vaccines and a man-made pandemic. So a lot of people contacted us once this thing started and said, is this the stuff you were predicting? And I said, yeah, you know, in Thrive 1, we had 68 controversial facts that we presented. And we hired professional fact checkers for months to make sure everything was accurate. And in 10 years, not a single one has been controverted because, you know, it was the obvious stuff. It was obvious to us. When you do your research, it becomes predictive, as you know. And yes, it's played out, unfortunately, exactly the way we predicted that it would if we didn't stop it. The good news is that the flip side of that is that hundreds of millions of people worldwide are waking up. And so in Thrive 2, we go into that and we give updates on how we're doing, you know, as a species in terms of resisting this toxic agenda. And you don't know about it because the mainstream media is not going to tell you about it. But for people who follow alternative media and for people who follow Thrive, you know, we try to collect that information and then present it because it's so obvious and so coherent once you see it. And actually, humanity is doing an amazingly good job of exposing the banking scheme and calling out the fake news and looking for alternatives to public propaganda education and alternatives to the medical tyranny, which we predicted, but now, I mean, we didn't know it'd come this fast and this heavy. But humanity has resisted getting RFID chips in our body. It's really fought back against the pesticides, and the GMOs are banned in 40 countries now. And the banking scheme and the fiat money and the fractional reserve, that whole fake system which is what gives the tyrants their power. That is being exposed now, and alternatives like cryptocurrency are being created, like real banks, like gold-backed currencies and so forth. So we're really in this race that Bucky Fuller predicted. He said, you know, we're in the race for the survival of humanity, and we're either going to end up in utopia or oblivion. And so, I mean, that's a long introduction to answering your question, which is what I feel is most necessary now, and the only reason we made Thrive 2, because Kimberly and I never thought we would make another movie. The first one took us 8 years of 12-hour days, and so we weren't eager to do that again. But what happened was we saw so much good news that we couldn't resist. We got contacted by over 1,000 inventors from all over the world and spent 5 years traveling around investigating energy devices, environmental, agricultural, and health techniques and health technologies and so forth. And we literally saw that every major problem that we're facing on Earth right now already has an existing solution, and they have certain principles in common. And we thought, okay, when so many people are feeling helpless and hopeless and just scared, the privilege of knowing what we know here empowers us. We need to make another film. People were coming up to us after our workshops and saying, I finally feel proud to be human again. You know, I finally got grounded hope. So we bit the bullet, spent 1,000 days and made Thrive 2, which brought to fruition the promise that was there in Thrive 1. We laid out the diagnosis and what was in the way of our thriving in Thrive 1. In Thrive 2, we present the evidence that we were correct about who's in the way and what their agenda is, but also the principles that we outlined have already manifested into cures for cancer, AIDS, chronic fatigue, heart disease, diabetes, and so forth. We found multiple inventors with free energy technologies, with fantastic, organic growing approaches and so forth. So we're actually in a world with tremendous good news that we're not being told about. So what do we do about that? The main thing that I'm recommending to people is study the Thrive movies so that you understand what's in the way and you understand the principles by which we can restore wholeness to natural systems, because that's the key. That's the code that nature does this just fine when we don't get in the way. These toroidal natural systems at every scale in the universe, if we recognize how they're being destroyed and then understand how to restore them, then we can each in our own specialties create the alternative, restoring the wholeness to natural systems, and then collaborate with each other, be ready to defend them, because obviously they're under attack. And fortunately, that's happening in spades all over the world.
Wow. There's something that you said in Thrive 1 that's very relevant right now, connected to really everything, because everything's connected to everything. And it's America is a hurdle to these people because of the way that it's built with its so-called freedoms and all that. And if these individuals, organizations, this mafia, if you want to call it, or a cult, as David Icke would call it, if they get their way in taking down the United States of America as we know it, then we have a problem. Now,
we got a big problem.
I would say we have a problem right now.
Yes.
Because I don't know if you saw the latest headlines with the Biden administration, but censorship is no longer just going to be on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. They're now starting to censor text messages between individuals.
Yes.
What do we do with things like that? Because it's one thing to say, there's a private company, they could do whatever they want, even though they're so big that they have power over the public domain. But what do we do in the situation where do we really go? It's our text messages. How do we get around something like that?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things that I say in Thrive 2. The first one is that the real struggle is not now between nation states, genders, classes, races, religions. It's between those who want to be free and those who would continue to try to steal our freedom from us.
Yep.
So that's the key, is for people to understand that this is not really a Republican, Democrat, you know, Labor, Tory, Whig, you know, it's not that false dichotomy. It's between the deep state and sovereign human beings.
Yes.
And it's being played out all over the world. And the Biden administration is simply an arm of a vast global, really a communist agenda. And of course, the Democrats are they've been more conquered than the Republicans by this whole communist socialist system, you know, over several generations, not only in the media, but in the schools and Hollywood, the whole thing. And in the research that I've done, I trace it back to China and to the deep state, because the deep state has chosen China as their superpower for the New World Order. Because as you were pointing out, and as we pointed out in Thrive 1, the major hurdle to the New World Order's agenda for complete domination of the globe is, you know, 300 million freedom lovers in the United States who are well armed, and a lot of them very alert to what's really going on. So the main task of the deep state has been and is now destroy America.
Yes.
So that you've got all these hundreds of millions of people broke, sick, and scared, and then desperate for a bigger government even to come in and rescue them. And the answer to that in the problem, reaction, solution sequence would be the New World Order. So what do we do in the face of that? Because obviously that's very powerful. Yeah. You know, Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum, they're epitomizing this right now. And when they had their last meeting, they just spontaneously raised $700 billion for this project. And, you know, we're all out there just scraping around trying to keep our podcasts going to get some truth into the world. But the other thing that I got to say in Thrive 2 is that we not only outnumber these perpetrators by way more than 1,000,000 to 1, but we have the truth and we have love and we have the life force on our side. And that's not just some, you know, hallmark cute thing to say or something like that. It's reality, and the life force are the same. And they're the same as the truth. So yeah, David Icke uses this wonderful image of, if you've got a big beach ball full of air and you try to hold it under the surface of a swimming pool, you can hold it there for a little while, but it's fighting the whole time to come up to the surface. And that's what the truth is doing. That's what love is doing. That's what the natural sovereignty of every individual, that is the most powerful force on the planet. So the real question is, how do we educate people to that? And then how do we assist people in organizing? And those are the two main things that Thrive is up to. The first, the two films were dedicated to the diagnosis and then the way out. And now what we've shifted our energy to is creating a solutions hub. We had one on our old website, and we already had over 1,100 groups from 90 countries around the world helping each other and collaborating on sharing best practices and resources and so forth. But it was, you know, it's an old-fashioned thing. It was 10 years old and it wasn't mobile friendly. So we've shut that down temporarily, and we've spent the last 6 months with a great team of programmers building a new mobile-friendly, multilingual infrastructure that will be offering soon for free to the entire world. The only criteria is that you need to not be violating anyone, and you need to be not initiating force with any of your solutions to be part of this network. So that takes all politicians out right away. And it takes anybody who's going to use force to impose their will. You can use it to protect yourself, but you can't initiate force. That's the fundamental thing that we say in Thrive 2 that the world is missing, is a universal morality based on coherent ethics. And the key to that is the non-aggression principle.
Absolutely.
Which states that simply that no one is allowed to initiate force against anyone else except in true self-defense. So those are the things that we feel are necessary, and we're working as hard and fast as we can with other groups from all over the world to make these infrastructures available so that we can organize on a principles basis rather than politics, and do it in a decentralized global way, because that, I think that's all that's missing.
That's incredible. I have a big picture question that may be a little different here. Right now, we're focused on decentralization because it just so happens to be that on every level, tangible, intangible, physical, spiritual, whatever you want to call it, both sides, all sides, are kind of collectively corrupted. So from my understanding, we're decentralizing in order to stop that poison from spreading, because the central seed is poisonous.
Yes.
Now let's skip to however long it's going to take. I hope sooner rather than later, but however long it's going to take to get to this new world that we create for ourselves through our collective consciousness, through our collective actions, through our collective everything.
Mm-hmm.
Do you believe that when the collective consciousness is changed, a centralized power will still be a bad thing?
It depends on your definition of centralized. If it's centralized because a few people have claimed the right to rule others, and therefore and have begun with the right to take people's money as taxation against their will, then yeah, that will still, then the cancer is still left in the body.
It's still there. Correct.
Exactly.
I'm saying, let's say we spiritually, consciously eradicate this cancer. The only way is to unify.
Yes, and I personally don't put my hope in mass spiritual awakening, because we don't have time for that. It's not happening fast enough. After 15 years of research, I'm really excited. I'm very optimistic, but in a very grounded way, because what I found was that we don't need for everyone to be enlightened. What we need is an enlightened rule around which we can unify voluntarily. And that enlightened rule has been missing. It used to be, centuries ago, just whoever had the biggest club would, set the rules. And then it was the church, and that was a big improvement. But the church led to, hundreds of millions of murders, because everybody had their different idea of God's word. And so they ended up with these mass wars and so forth. So then the state came in with, the rule of law, which was a great idea. It's a huge improvement. However, all the different states have their ideas of what the law is. And of course, they claim that power of government. They claim the jurisdiction over a particular group of people falsely. And so they end up fighting with each other. And the state is the only institution to exceed the church in terms of its number of mass murders. In the 20th century, over 200 million murders, and that's not counting the wars. That's within the boundaries of nation states themselves, over 200 million. So obviously humanity is, we don't get it yet. We're close, we're going the right direction. If you look from the pharaohs to the kings, to the dictators, to the presidents, prime ministers, and premiers, we've come a long way. As Martin Luther King said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. So that is, we're bending towards something. So what is it we're bending toward? Well, we've been taught that what we were bending toward was democracy. And that's a mistake. Democracy is a big improvement over the dictatorship and the royalty and the pharaohs and so forth. But democracy is a step along the way, because the goal is individual sovereignty, not mob rule. And democracy, even if it were honest, is still mob rule. You know, a lynch mob was a democratic entity, you know, that where you could have only one dissenter, but it's still, you know, mass violence. So that's the key. And in Thrive 2, we mention it in Thrive 1, but we really go into it in Thrive 2 and lay out the history of how it has shown that it works when it's allowed to. It leads to prosperity, security, and happiness. So of course, the tyrants will come in and try to take over the tax base and, you know, take over individuals. But we also show how it could work. And then the real challenge, once you realize that it not only could work, and what I'm talking about is a stateless society. Most people can't even imagine a society without government. Yeah. And I understand that. I couldn't understand it myself. It was my own son who introduced me to the notion. And we argued for months, like 3 months. And I finally realized that his argument was coherent and mine was just based on really old thinking. So I said, okay, educate me. And boy, he opened up the rest of my life and really led to a lot of the revelations of Thrive 1 and Thrive 2. And this is what I've dedicated the rest of my life to just waking up humanity to this notion that instead of organizing around politics, another, you know, who's got the power, who's got the stick, organize around principles. And the core principle, you know, there's nature principles, there's scientific principles, and then there's ethical principles. And the core thing that we're missing is the ethical principle of non-aggression. And it's exactly the same as the scientific principle that allows these inventors to access free energy. Absolutely. Every single free energy inventor has a device that creates a geometric movement, a geometric access to the unified field through resonance, through dancing, through harmony, rather than through explosion and violence and, you know, kind of raping the unified field in order to take the energy. That doesn't work. It's led us to the brink of destruction as a species. So the principles are actually really simple and they're so beautiful. You know them well. I've read you know what you've been writing. I've watched a lot of your videos, and you understand, particularly on the spiritual level, that if you take this scientific concept of resonance and apply it at the human level, what it means is being free to have your direct connection with spirit, and then be free from violence and coercion from other beings. Out of that, we can choose and create natural community. So we'll end up in a thriving world of community, but the relationships will be voluntary. So we have true community rather than coerced communism. And I think we can do that within the next few decades. It's going to be a snowball effect. And I think we're going to actually survive and thrive as a species faster than anyone can actually currently imagine.
I think it's a principle of just energetic law. You know, when you shoot a slingshot, the further you pull back that pebble, the further it's going to fly. It's just how it is. You know,
that's right.
Right now we're being pulled back and back and back until, like you said, we thrive, we fly, we continue. It's what I would call our destiny. That's my personal belief. I think no matter what happens,
yes,
in my personal perspective and opinion, beliefs, it's not the question of are we going to get there? It's what's going to happen along the way. We're getting there. We're getting there. It might take 100 years, 1,000 years. It might take as long as it needs to take.
Yeah.
We're going to get there. How many people have to die along the way? You know, how many nuclear bombs have to go off? How many people have to be poisoned? How many times do you have to be robbed and raped? How many times? You know, and that's personally the way I see it, which again is why is a reason why I'm so in love with the work that you're doing, because you're bringing that destiny closer through showing that it's possible.
Yeah.
Now, something that I think is also really relevant right now is with, of course, free energy. You talk about that a lot in regards to the geometry behind how these things work, which I'm very connected to as well and in resonance with. in regards to the whole agenda right now with disclosure, extraterrestrial life, I know you spoke a lot about that. I speak a lot about that. I love that realm and that field. I think there's a lot of power for us in there. And of course, it just makes sense that there are motives to keep that away from the public for the purposes of not making energy free, because those big boys make a lot of money. So what's your stance? I mean, literally just about what, 20 days ago, 18 days ago, exactly. There was supposed to be the deadline for that disclosure with
Right.
extraterrestrial life from the Pentagon. And they ended up releasing this to the public, at least, releasing this 9-page. It was dumb. There's no other way. Like they were telling me, they were writing in there, it might be plastic bags. The only identified thing out of 144 instances is a weather balloon. Sounds like Roswell, New Mexico.
Right.
Why'd you only start in 2004 to 2021 instead of 1940s when we have records of all of these things? So there was a lot of things that were very questionable there, but personally, I think it just made them look very dumb.
Yeah.
And what that showed me is many people are just not aware because not enough people were calling it out.
Yeah.
So what's your stance on that whole recent, I'm not even going to call it a disclosure, but whatever you want to call it, that whole event, where do you stand with that in regards to your beliefs on the motives to keep this behind?
Yeah, I think that was the next few crumbs that are being brushed off their table to the rest of us. But it's almost as much of a joke as the SETI project has got these big antennas and they send out this broadcast and everything. And they've been listening for 30, 40 years or something like that for ET to speak back. Meanwhile, there's ships all over the planet. There's people having direct contact. They're going on ships and reporting back on the technologies. There's thousands, tens of thousands of crop circles which lay out the star maps and the technology. And then, as Jacques Vallée says, 80% of the ET contact is telepathic. So that doesn't even count all of that. That all of us, we're each in our own way, we are having contact with intelligences in the field, interdimensionally, whatever, that are so far beyond whatever we learned in school or just the capabilities of our rational mind. So it really is almost like a cosmic joke that they're saying, here this big report comes out with essentially nothing provable at all. The good news of that is that they're having to put something out because it's emerging. The truth is emerging in literally every single sector right now. And they know it. That's why they're having to do COVID right now. This whole pandemic thing, they're getting exposed so fast in the global domination agenda that they're having to go, okay, we need to leap across the goal line into totalitarian control before they bring us down entirely. So they're having to deal in the media, in Hollywood, in economics, in the UFO realm, in energy. They're having to deal with the truth emerging everywhere. And of course, Twitter has banned us. We were doing a countdown till we had a month where we let Thrive 2 go for free. So we counted down 10, 9, 8. When we got to day 3, Twitter banned us because, we reveal all this stuff in the movie and it's all factual. We're not speculating. So I think that, as I said, the good news is that they had to deal with it in order to try to stay in control of the narrative. I think that's the only reason why they're doing it. I've got friends who were, in Black Ops projects and so forth. They know to a great extent what the secret space program already has in terms of free energy, counter gravity, contact with extraterrestrials, the whole thing. So we're living in this kind of twilight world where what we're being told is so ridiculous compared to the truth that people are just waking up all over the world. So I'm really thrilled that people like you are bringing in this information And I've got contacts all over the world who are bringing in the information from interdimensional beings, from extraterrestrials, from really solid UFO researchers like Richard Dolan and Steve Bassett and people like that. So even that truth is coming out.
Absolutely. There's a common question that I don't know if there's a concrete answer, but I'd like to ask you to see your take on it. It's easy to say, and by the way, I completely agree with you for the record if it's not obvious, but it's easy to say, okay, there are certain people in power that don't want certain technology to come out. So they're going to suppress that technology and make sure it doesn't get into the hands of the people. But the extraterrestrial life that has been here and is here right now, and there's many of them living among us in many different forms, by the way, some of them looking like us as well.
Right.
The question that's asked to me a lot is, if what you're saying is true, and these beings have such high technology and they're so powerful, then how come they're not coming out themselves and revealing that to humanity? How come, if the good side exists, why aren't they coming out with certain technology? And I have my answer, which I'll share, but I want to hear yours first. I'm curious to hear your take on it.
Well, I was obsessed with that question for about a decade back in the 90s. And then, because my assumption was that if a species had gotten far enough along in their evolution to have the technology where they could travel interdimensionally or interplanetary, intersolar system, galaxy, whatever, that they would have had to get through the self-destructive phase.
Correct.
What we have as the nuclear phase, the political phase.
Yep.
So therefore, if they're here, they must have mastered harmony. But that was just my speculation. And I would hear people like Stephen Greer and Nassim Haramein and Danny Sheehan and others, each having a different opinion about that. And then in 2003, I was invited to a think tank back in Cambridge, Massachusetts, at the house of John Mack. Are you familiar with John Mack? He was a Harvard psychiatrist who was brought in to interview many people claiming to have been abducted by extraterrestrials. And so he came in to, find out what's really going on. And he was blown away. He said, I don't know the reality of what's going on, but what I do know is most of these people are telling the truth. And so he became quite an expert in the field. So there I was at his house. Finally, I had read his book, and I finally got to meet him, spend a little time alone with him. And I said, John, I've been looking forward for years to asking you this question. And I asked him exactly that question. I said, are there any bad ETs? Because I assume that if they're here, they must be peaceful. And he said, Foster, I appreciate the question, but it's the wrong question. Okay. I said, okay, well, fill me in. And he said you're assuming that if they're that far ahead of us in terms of evolution of consciousness, that they would treat us well. Look how far human beings are ahead of the rat in terms of consciousness, and look how we treat them in our laboratories. And I will never forget that moment. It was like, okay. And he said, it's not that they have a cruel agenda. We don't have a cruel agenda against the rats. It's just that our researchers aren't conscious enough to find other ways of doing that research than torturing rats in order to get information. And so in what I've learned from experts over the last almost 20 years, I'm convinced, like you are, that we're being visited by probably at least 50 different species. There's some from inner Earth, there's some outside, there's some, that are here among us. I've seen hours of amazing videotape, including of, ships that travel in ways that we can't, shooting lasers at each other, literally having Star Wars out there, and with night vision goggles, people have recorded this stuff.
Yeah.
So I do think that there are species here who don't have our best interest in mind and have their eyes on our planet, on our resources, on our biology, and that they have agendas that would end up taking over all of those things. And I think that there are other species that are here to help us survive. They can't do it for us. I think that's the prime directive, and that's why they're not showing up, landing on the White House lawn. They have, numerous, we had it in Thrive 1, the numerous incidents where these ships will come down over Air Force bases and turn off nuclear silos when they're turned on for testing or drills or something like that. So there clearly are beings here to help us. But I think the prime directive is that they can only assist us the way you'd assist a toddler, on a jungle gym or something like that. They're trying to keep us from falling off and cracking our heads, but they can't actually do it for us because we have to build the skills to climb that apparatus so we can climb back down and be independent on our own. So I think that they're here. A lot of them are helping us, but we are in quarantine, and we won't get out of quarantine until we actually master how we relate to energy and to other beings. And that's what I've dedicated my life to, and that's what the Thrive movies are about.
It's so fascinating. So what I'm hearing on the good side of your perspective, in terms of the good side of those beings, would be not to interfere with the conscious evolution of humanity, meaning there are certain things that they'll come in the way with, like, let's say, nuclear bombs and things like that affect more than something local. Right. And then there are other things that they won't, like, let's say, elections or things of that nature. Yeah. So I find it really interesting. I know that there's a lot of controversy in regards to specifically extraterrestrial life. And are they here to hurt us? Are there only good ones? Are there bad ones? And then, like Dr. Stephen Greer will say, no, they're good. There are no ill intentions here. And then the majority of individuals in the realm of extraterrestrial life and all that will say, no, there are good ones and there are bad ones. And I'm personally on the perspective, in resonance with the perspective of Dr. Stephen Greer. For reasons of my own research experience, coupled with individuals who I know work with those individuals on a firsthand basis, who I happen to be affiliated with. Yeah. So it's a really, not that I can bring like black and white proof, whatever that would look like, right? So I just make my choice of belief based on my past experiences, and I respect individuals that don't see it that way either, because again, right, we can't all come down to the same conclusion, but we could respect everybody's beliefs and hear everyone out. So I find it interesting to just see those perspectives. The rat analogy was very powerful. What I would say is, individuals who I know who work with those beings, who've been on those crafts, who've traveled in them, in regards to the technology that's used, works not just through physical technology with whether it's solar radiation or magnetism or whatever else they may be using, but also through some form of technology having to do with an extension of consciousness, meaning the power of thought. Yes. And pretty much the craft, from my understanding, becomes an extension of the operator's consciousness who's actually operating that craft. So I explained this in depth on a show that I did on Gaia, with an in-depth description of the inside of, not all, because I don't know what all of them look like, but some of the crafts, whatever shape they may be, whether it's a triangle, a pyramid, a saucer, that tic-tac looking thing, many, many different shapes. Yes. And there's some form of technology that I don't completely understand whatsoever, and I'm not going to make believe to understand. But it all has to do with some sort of panel of some sort that in some cases the operator touches, in some cases the operator doesn't, and the power of thought works without that physical contact. Yeah. But the operator in and of themselves, and any races who I know of on an actual individual level, are all well-intentioned. And they also say that there aren't any races out there that have intentions of war or perpetrating disease or any of that. Now, the question is, my question was always, well, what about those individuals who say we've been abducted, very, very bad experience? And I brought that up to one of the producers at Gaia. And he gave me a beautiful analogy. And he said, let's say you were put under at the dentist's office and you woke up with a dentist with a drill in your mouth. Well, if you forgot and didn't know who that dentist was, you would think that that dentist is doing something to murder you in a very violent way. But really, it's just your understanding and your perspective and your lens is of one that's not of understanding what's happening. So you're afraid instead of understanding what's going on there. And then, of course, in addition to that, Dr. Greer comes with a lot of different evidence. Again, what is evidence? But evidence of a lot of sort of like false information that's been thrown in to make us afraid of the individuals who have the technology that can help us.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I wanted to share that, to just share my perspective with you on that as well. I still hold the perspective of what you held in the 90s. Maybe I'll evolve out of that eventually, but I still hold the perspective of they must be living in some form of harmony or unity if they figured out that technology and haven't wiped themselves out yet.
Yeah.
But maybe that will change over time. I have no idea.
Yeah, I think it's one of the most interesting and important conversations that we can all be continuing to have on planet Earth right now. And, you know, I gave talks at MUFON and also Contact in the Desert recently. One of the major points that I wanted to get across was, even if we're very close to real disclosure and, you know, a very impressive craft lands and they stay there when the cameras arrive and they get out and they're telepathic and they can do all this stuff, no matter how impressive they are, I believe that it's really important that we remember the non-aggression principle and not subjugate ourselves to them as if they're the next set of gods descending from the heavens. Correct. So it gets real interesting taking that perspective and going back in history, because I chuckle sometimes when I'm in debates with someone about, well, are there extraterrestrials? My research shows me we are all extraterrestrials.
That was my next question. What does being a human really mean?
Totally. And
look at the diversity here. What the hell is going on?
Right. Evolution, biological evolution absolutely does not explain how, you know, we got here, you know, Mozart and Shakespeare, how we got here this quick is absolutely not explained by simple evolution. And there's more and more evidence, both from, you know, current contact and from the Dead Sea Scrolls and all that kind of stuff, that that we're actually hybrid beings. The reason we're at this level of consciousness is that we are hybrids. And so if we are hybrids, then did they ask permission of the Neanderthal or Cro-Magnon ladies or gentlemen, whatever? I don't know. You know, the whole law of one approach says, well, you know, if we're being abducted in this, we agreed to that in a previous life or in a higher dimension. I'm not ready to write it off to that. If beings are coming and abducting and doing medical experiments and taking things out of your body and so forth, that's actually not okay with me. I want to set up a new standard for extraterrestrial contact where I go, okay, maybe you got away with that in the past, and maybe that's even why we're here. But from now on, you've got to ask. You ask and we'll ask. And unless there's voluntary consent both ways, we won't do anything.
No, it's true. You know, where is that line? Where is that line of consent? Does it exist? And the I don't know if to call it a problem, but the topic is the fact that there's so much secrecy around this.
Yeah.
You know, Chaim Eshed, the guy that just came out of Israel, he's like 80 something. Right. And he just said, listen, we have agreements with them. And I scratched my head and I'm like, wait, what do you mean? What do you mean agree? Is there a contract?
I don't remember signing that one.
You know, it's, I don't know. There's so much controversy. And what makes this topic so, I mean, sketchy, for lack of a better word, is the potential motives behind it. You know,
exactly.
Just like you brought up in your work. It's all about one of the biggest topics here, free energy. And this is huge. You know, if this technology were to come out, it's over for not one industry. the majority of industries, everything. Right now, there's a war over oil and electricity,
Right.
and there's a war. Imagine there's something that comes and makes both of those obsolete. It puts everybody out.
Yeah. Well, when you see our sequel,
Yes.
you'll see I've found and filmed a bunch of these already. And so it's the problem is not technical anymore. It's really political. It's a security issue. It's a financial issue. But the technologies, I believe that I've been looking for 20 years. I believe now, just in the past 2 years, that I have found 7 working devices, and every single one of them has a different approach, but they all have nonviolence in common.
Interesting. Okay, so I'm going to tell you what, I'm going to watch the second one because I haven't seen it yet. And if you're open to it, I'd love to do a follow-up on that specifically and cover big picture, because I really enjoy speaking with you. I like the energy here.
Yeah, great. No, I would love to do that. And it's actually kind of ideal that we have a chance to talk about Thrive One in relation to our current situation before going to that whole next level.
Absolutely. And I don't know if everybody in our audience or community have seen Thrive One, so we're definitely going to be putting that forward so they can watch that as well. And then
I recommend to everyone that go to thriveon.com, and both Thrive One and Thrive Two are available there.
Awesome. Awesome. I love it. So before we close this out, and I had some other points, but I don't want to overwhelm anybody with too many points, because we tend to do that sometimes, especially when we have David Icke on. It ends up becoming this that you have to watch 10 times to understand what's going on. But I know at this point, big picture, at least most of our community understands what it is that's going on here, big picture.
Yeah.
And more so these interviews and discussions are to take the nuances of the controversial topics of that truth movement and say, okay, let's figure it out more. Let's talk about it more. We don't always have to agree, but let's talk about it. Let's critically think and take it there. So before we close out, I have one question for you.
Sure.
There's one thing you and I have in common. We both came from a very promising background where everything was set, and chose a different path. You have been on that path a lot longer than I have. And my decision was made pretty recently of being very set in a real estate family where I didn't have to do anything more. Everything was set. I could travel the world. I could do what I want, and everything was good for me. But personally, that wasn't enough. I can't live in a world doing everything, seeing people next to me starving and killing themselves. So I made my choice. But I mean, you've been on this path a whole lot longer. So if you can summarize your experience and your power behind that choice that you made, and I'm asking in order to inspire others that are in that same situation, because I know many are. And it so happens to be that when you do come from a place of money, not always, but a lot of the time, it's easy to lose yourself and just remain in your comfort zone instead of leaving the comfort zone because it's already made. So how did you make that decision when you decided to make it?
Well, thanks for the question. I think I would attribute it to 2 main things. One is I believe that I came here this lifetime for this. I came to help humanity figure out how to relate harmoniously to energy. I think that's why I was given that vision at age 14 that has shaped the rest of my life. And so when I am in alignment with that purpose, then it feels great. And when I'm not, it feels terrible. It's like, what am I doing? And the other thing is that I was blessed with fantastic parents. My father was just an icon of integrity in his community. And my mother was as unconditionally loving a being as I've ever met. And I didn't realize when I was a kid that wasn't what everybody's parents were like. So the bottom line of that was that they supported my integrity and they supported my curiosity. They were very mystified by a lot of the things that I was into, but they never questioned me. As long as they felt I was being truthful, they just said, we don't understand for sure what you're up to, but we trust you, go for it. So those 2 hurdles having that clear purpose and then having the support from my family really helped me get over the edge of leaving the East Coast establishment and calling out the virtually every major institution. And I was recruited by a ton of those institutions. And thank God I just knew intuitively to never, join those organizations. And I'm really grateful now. Like you said, if you and I could afford to be sitting drinking beers on a beach in Tahiti, but would that be a life? It would be nice for a week or so. Let's do that. In fact, I'll meet you there. But meanwhile, what about our species? What about our family? And when you know what you and I know, then the deeper calling is to not only your purpose, but to the truth of what you know. And I want to acknowledge you for following it also, because I know that you have major forces calling you right now. And I've been following, for many months, at least, maybe a year or something. I've been following your progress in tuning into that, deciding how much to share, how much risk to take, how much to say at any given time. So I really respect what you're doing, and it's an honor to be in conversation with you.
I appreciate that so much, Foster. Thank you. And I feel like I can relate to you a lot. So it's refreshing. It's very refreshing to, I always said what makes what I'm doing personally a little more difficult in regards to the nuances and the details of what I'm doing is on the detailed level of it, I don't have a role model to look up to say, oh, okay, he did that. I can learn from that path. It's really creating the path on the way as I'm going. But when I find people like you who I have like that principle in common of the path, and other people where I have other principles in common with them, it's like, it just makes it easier. It gives me a lot more faith and power and belief in myself to just continue, because I'm not going to sit here and say sometimes I don't doubt myself. I think we all do, especially when you're facing that sort of public realm of, oh my God, and you get all these comments and feedback and everything. Right. But it's just refreshing to speak to people like you, because when you can relate, it makes it more powerful and feeling we're doing this.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And we're all finding each other, and we're all much stronger together. Yep. Let me say one more thing before we wrap, because you mentioned election fraud before. And in terms of the grounded optimism that I said that I'm feeling, what I think is starting to happen is that there are dominoes that are starting to fall over. False parts of the agenda are starting to go. I did a show just a couple of days ago on my Freedom Portal.
Okay.
On the election fraud. And I've been researching this for a long time. And there are 5 great films that have come out recently. And I went and pulled the best clips and then put it in the context of the rest of my research. And it's a done deal. The forensic evidence is absolutely there. So I believe the first big domino to fall, and I think it's going to be happening within the next month or two, is the election fraud. And I'm not, I'm a voluntarist. I could care less about the left or the right and all this false polarity. But while we're still in a governmental system that can affect our lives, at the very least, we should have honest elections, and we don't. So that we are that close to a global totalitarian dictatorship, because this same deep state communist agenda has now completely taken over the election system in the US. And I lay out all the evidence for that. And other people, they've got it all, and it's coming out now. So I think the first domino to fall is going to be the election fraud. And the next dominoes, and I'm not sure in exactly what order, are going to be the pedophilia, the UFO, the disclosure, the free energy, the banking, and then out of that, the whole education, Hollywood, the media, all that kind of stuff. And once that gets started, it's going to be so hard for the culprits to stay as like controllers in that agenda. They're going to be running for the hills. They already are. Hundreds of CEOs are resigning. They're turning all their money into yachts and buying private islands and just going and hiring guards to try to protect them from what is coming in terms of truth and reconciliation. So that's why I'm so optimistic about what is coming, because ultimately the truth and reality and love are unstoppable.
Absolutely. I'm excited to see it come to fruition. I was just at a conference with, Clay Clark by any chance?
No, I don't.
So he put a conference together, which is kind of like a tour, but Mike Lindell was there. General Flynn was there, and
Oh, great.
they were giving a lot of intel on what you just said. And
Okay, I watched a bunch of video from that conference. And of course, the films that I was referring to are from Mike and from Patrick Flynn, and also from Joshua Phillip at the Epic Times.
Correct. So we'll see where it goes. I hope everything they're saying and you're saying happens as quick as we hope it to happen.
Yeah.
I hoped a lot of things were going to happen. They didn't happen yet,
Right.
So I'm just sitting here like, let's not put all the hope there, but I really do. And that's it. We'll see where the world goes. But
yeah, one of the things that I have learned over time is that I can feel quite confident about the trends, but not to have to put confidence in the timing.
Absolutely. Well, listen, it was amazing speaking with you. And it's an honor having you on. I'm going to watch Thrive 2. We'll do a follow-up. We'll go deeper, big picture, probably more nuances, and have some fun with that. And we'll take it from there. I appreciate your time.
Great. Well, thanks for the invitation. Get back in touch with me after you watch Thrive 2, and we'll do a follow-up.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Subscribe.